Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on overview of forensic accounting and investigation standards organized by Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, hosted by Goa branch of WRC of ICAI. Myself, CA Vaibhav Bade, Secretary of Goa branch. We are indeed grateful to DAAB for giving us the opportunity to host this event. Now I request, just to update everyone, we are informed the chairman of the board, Charanjit sir, is traveling and will not be in a position to join us. Also, vice chairman Dayanivas sir is also traveling, but chances are there that he will join us later, sometime later. So with that update, I request our Goa branch chairman, CA Gaurav Kekre, kindly give a welcome address.
Yes, thank you, Vaibhav. Respected Chairman of the DAAB, CA Charanjit Nanda sir in absentia, Vice Chairman CA Dayanivas Sharma sir in absentia, our eminent faculties for today, Mr. Harish Dua, CA Uday Kulkarni, CA Sailesh Kaushik, all the participants of this webinar, a very warm welcome to all of you. So firstly, as our Secretary Vaibhav has mentioned, a big thank you to Nanda sir and the DAAB for allowing Goa branch to host this kind of live webinar on a very important topic of forensic accounting and investigation standards. So why I say it's important is because generally it is perceived that auditors are not bloodhounds, they are watchdogs. But our role is sort of undergoing some kind of change. If you see the other bodies like NFRA, even the ROC, the income tax, the GST department, they expect much more from us. Even the clients to an extent are now, even for example, for the banking sector, whenever there's some kind of bad loans, some of the fingers are asked at the CA as if we were the ones who were doing a forensic accounting of those. So all these people all these auditors who are dealing with such kind of institutions or bodies, we need to at least have an overview of the forensic accounting and investigation standards so that we can decide whether we want to go in depth into this or not. Some of us who are not doing although forensic auditing, etc., but regular audits, but for high value assessees, we may feel the need to get into a specific study into this. So I think today's webinar would be a good primer to all of us. And the Goa branch would definitely, solicit from our members that if they want us to have more detailed workshops on these kind of topics, maybe after today's session, they can get back to us and we'll definitely arrange them for them. So with those small brief remarks, I would like to hand over to our secretary again. Vaibhav, please take over.
Thank you, Gaurav. Moving forward, we move towards our first session for today, which will be handled by Shri Harish Dua sir. It's my pleasure to introduce to all of you Harish Dua sir. He's a finance and business professional with over 37 years of experience in area of governance, risk, and ethics. Now retired from active service and practicing as a finance and business advisor. Currently serving as advisor for FAIS with DAAB at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India with responsibility to prepare the new standards. Previously, he did the same with the Internal Auditing Standards Board and created new revised standards on internal audit. Also serving as an adjunct faculty at the School of Corporate Governance, Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, and as adjunct faculty at Jaipuria School of Business on the subject Business Ethics and Corporate Governance. He has been active in the internal audit and risk management profession and served as president of IIA Delhi chapter from 2005 to 7. He was also program director for the risk-based internal audit program for the Institute for Government Accounts and Finance under the aegis of Controller General of Accounts, Government of India. He was also the program director for the ICAI in 2009 for their certificate course on enterprise risk management. He is currently on the advisory board of the Risk Management Association of India and on the Academic Advisory Council of the Jaipuria School of Business. He is a member of ASSOCHAM, National Council for Corporate Fraud and Internal Audit, and served as a member and chairman of the jury on the number of awards conferred by IIA, India, and some other professional bodies. He is also an active participant as panelist in conferences and seminars on governance, risk, and internal audit. Also, a fellow member of the Institute of Directors, New Delhi. So I present before you very resourceful faculty for today, Sir Harish Dua, sir. Sir, it's all yours, sir, now.
Good evening. Thank you, Reverendji. Thank you, Gauravji, for opening remarks and for introducing. One bit I would like to add is that I've had extensive employment experience in both here in India and abroad, and I was actually involved with these setting up standards based on some 500 odd investigations that I've been involved in, which was of course not there in the introduction material that we got, but I thought I'd just let that be known in the sense that there is a fair amount of basic hands-on exposure that came into play. Anyway, I've been very fortunate to have been involved with the institute in putting together these standards, including auditing standards and things like that, which is, I guess, my way of giving back to the profession. With that opening remark, I will now share my screen, and I will present to you my presentation on what I need to say. Basically, we have 3 sections today. Can you see my screen? Are you able to see my presentation, first page?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes.
Excellent. So, basically, what we will be talking about today, there will be 3 sessions. Just to give you an overview, there are 2 more speakers coming behind me. Session 2 and session 3 are being taken, or rather being taken by other experts who are involved in the standard setting process. Mr. Kaushik and Mr. Udayji, Chalishji and Udayji are going to be joining us a little later. And they were also part of the group that was set up by the institute to draft and issue these standards. So I will take session 1, which I will cover an overview and some bit of the first few standards. The actually agenda goes like something like this. I will give you an overview of what these standards are and how they are first in the world. There is no accounting body in the whole world who has actually put in so much time and effort in coming out with some of these kind of standards, which were a new body of knowledge. There have been some attempts by some accounting institutes to put together 1 or 2 standards pertaining to forensics and things like that. But nowhere in the world, other than the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, in honest and sincere to actually come out with a full body of standards. And I will, once we get into that, we'll talking about. We will then, of course, also cover a little bit about what the objectives of these standards are and what we hope to achieve, and what is the aim of the institute in putting so much time and effort in this area. Some bit of that you've already got with the opening remarks of Weber. What I will give you the overview of the status where we are. It's a long journey that has been started, and of course, it's just some of the things to come. It's in fact, it's a start of a journey, I would say, and we will talk about what more is there in the pipeline and how you, as a member of the institute, can play more of an active role in this area. I will end my session on that in terms of way forward. Of course, we'll cover a little bit about the applicability and also one key aspect pertaining to these standards, which is the definitions. And there is a term called forensic audit that gets used a lot. And it's incumbent upon us as professionals to be very clear on what do we mean by that term and whether or not we ought to be using it at all in the first place. I will then end my session 1 with the basic principles and also cover 4 of the 100 series standards, which were on key concepts. So that is the plan for the next hour or so. If anybody has any questions, I think we can use the chat mode to try and answer your question. Otherwise, it may be best if we, if I leave 5 minutes towards the end of my presentation, and in the meantime, we'll collect the questions and then I can take them one by one towards the end. I think that might be a better way to address your particular concerns that may come up during the course of my presentation. Okay, so I suspect most of the participants are looking to sincerely make a change in the way they operate in this area. And the first thing to do, of course, is to raise your standards when you are sincerely wanting to change yourself. That is a motto that I live by, and I know most of us professionals who have made the effort to join us are thinking along similar lines. So the best place to do is to raise your own standards, and then, of course, everything will fall in place. Now, what is the objective of the institute in putting out these standards? Of course, 100% quality is an underlying theme in all of this. A lot of time and effort has gone into putting these standards together. And the institute, of course, wishes to make sure that they achieve the overall objectives of quality in coming up with a full set of standards in this area. And of course, using the knowledge of the members and other experts in codifying the best practices is the best way forward to do that, which is why when we started this journey almost 2 years now, in August of 2 years ago in August, and then in months we completed the process, and next month will be second anniversary, so to speak, in our start. So the great minds were called upon, and the best practices were distilled and downloaded from these great minds, and we put together a set of standards on this topic. They are, of course, needed because they clarify the expectations of not just the professionals that are working in the area, but also our stakeholders, the clients and the board of directors and other stakeholders who use the output that they generate. Okay, so that is a key objective. Of course, with having definitions, we all get complete clarity on what is expected. When I say forensic and you say forensic, we have to be on the same wavelength. When I talk about modus operandi and you hear the term, you should know what I am referring to. So these definitions are a key way of basically getting everybody on the same wavelength. Next, of course, the basic benchmarks of service should be there. You know, we all ought to be able to deliver what we believe is a fundamental and basic quality of service. It is not when I complete an engagement, somebody else completes a similar engagement, and that somebody else may or may not be a member of the institute. But as far as members of the institute are concerned, we ought to be able to deliver a similar base level service. And of course, we as professionals need to harmonize and improve our own performance, and make sure that when we are conducting certain procedures, we have a good chance of coming up what we believe to be the truth of the matter. And after all, at the end of the day, what we deliver is something that should stand on its own, and nothing better than the truth that speaks for itself. Of course, this body of knowledge will also help the aspiring professionals who may not be qualified yet with the basic knowledge and guidance that is essential in this area. So that is also one key objective in putting out these standards, because forensic is now such a buzzword that nobody is immune to these kind of assignments, and nobody is immune to rather avoid this area. Every day it's there on the headlines with the frauds. There is some effort or another going on through the help of forensics to unearth a lot of these frauds. So the basic knowledge and guidance is quite essential when we are talking about these new terms. And at the end of the day, we have to be able to evaluate our own quality of service. The ICAI brand, something that we stand for, has to not be put in any jeopardy through substandard work and procedures. And this is one of those areas where our work is actually subject to cross-examination, which I will talk about later. And we as professionals need to be therefore very diligent and very vigilant as well, both at the same time. Diligent in performing our work and vigilant in terms of making sure that the work that we do delivers top quality output. So at the bottom, of course, the ICA brand forms the basis on which we are working with these standards, and these are the objectives that we undertake these assignments. Now, to give you a quick overview on where we stand, this is a bit of a snapshot that you will see. We have basically six series of standards. The first are basically overarching documents in the form of three-phase framework and basic principles. And these are supported by certain key concepts of 100 series. So overarching documents and these key concepts apply to almost all the standards. Okay, so when I talk about engagement management, the 200 series, these will take us one level below and start taking us to an engagement level. The other speakers will cover the remaining 200, 300 series. 300 series gets into even more granular, into an assignment level. Engagement is slightly broader than an assignment. Assignment is one little project, whereas multiple assignments will be part of an engagement. That is the thinking behind the drafting of these standards, which is why I'm making that distinction. It's there in the manner in which these standards have given the series numbers as well. Of course, then we get into certain specialized areas. More and more, there is a need to be somewhat of an expert in some area or another. For example, data analysis or digital domain. Loans and borrowings brings its own nuances and complexities, and related and connected parties are a number of areas where a lot of these unethical activities are happening, are requiring the deployment of forensic expertise. Okay, so these are some of the specialized areas that are also relevant and part of our agenda for undertaking forensic assignments. Of course, reporting the results and quality assurance are the other two more important standards, which are also getting covered today. But as you will appreciate, my friends, we have 23 standards already in place, the last one, 440, on related and connected parties is being drafted as we speak. Excuse me. And, and of course, there will be more to come as we go along. And in fact, I look forward to many of the participants in this call to give us suggestions on where you believe you some standard or another that will help add to the body of knowledge that you see on the screen. And we will certainly look forward to your inputs towards the end of this session today, and also your participation going forward in helping us to add to the body of knowledge in this area. Because, you know, as you get more and more involved, you will realize that this is a very complex area. It requires a lot of innovation, new thinking, and new procedures that are very different than what we may be used to in our other areas of audits and investigations. Okay, so with that overview, let me now proceed to the next bit on overarching documents. Excuse me, I'm getting a frog in my throat. Overarching documents are the three documents I just mentioned: preface, framework, and basic principles. Preface basically introduces the standards. It's one small document that talks about what these standards are, talks about DAB and how DAB is driving this agenda. And also it introduces certain basic aspects which I will cover here. Basically, there are two things I wanted to emphasize insofar as the preface is concerned. Number one, that these standards are principle based. Okay, they are basically not what we call as prescriptive in nature, but descriptive in nature. In other words, they describe the expected outcome from the work that is undertaken by the professional in this area. So the focus is very much outcome. What is it you hope to achieve? As a professional, the standard tells you that you need to be able to deliver this when you complete your work. This is the outcome that you ought to be delivering. It does not get into something called the what, or rather the how. Okay, it talks about the what, but not the how. So it doesn't give you a checklist approach. It really focuses on the work to be completed. And if somebody is looking at the of me as a professional, what are the kind of things would they look for in my let's say work papers? Okay. So the how will come later.
भाई सर सॉरी टू डिस्टर्ब, लेकिन फीडबैक आ रहा है कि आवाज थोड़ी क्रैक हो रही है बोल के सर.
Oh, okay.
Can it something be done? कुछ प्रॉब्लम है?
I'm just checking my connection. Yeah, connectivity is here, but maybe my connectivity is more because it's raining a little bit outside here.
Okay, okay, sir.
It could be because of that. Okay. Oh yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let me do that. One second. Okay, so you may not be able to see me, but I can see my presentation. Is my presentation visible? Okay, so I'll carry on. Maybe this might improve the connectivity. So what I was saying was the institute is in the process of putting together guidance notes that will support these standards. Implementation guide, technical guides are being drafted, and they will be getting issued. Some of you as participants may want to join us in that effort as we draft these documents, which are critical to ensure that the implementation is robust. Second point I wanted to cover on the preface is the mandatory nature. Okay, these standards will become mandatory to all the institute members, and they will hopefully also be mandatory on all the forensic accounting and investigation engagements. Uh, as you know, currently anyone can conduct these kind of engagements. You don't have to be a member of the institute to undertake forensic work, for example. And that's because the government has left it in that way. But the institute, nevertheless, is taking its own leadership role in making sure that at least the members of the institute are not found wanting in this area because of our expertise and whatever. So our work should speak for itself. Nevertheless, there are no other accounting bodies or any other bodies that filled out the manner which forensic engagements are conducted. It's quite likely that the government may choose all standards and make them mandatory on everyone, including non-members of the institute. Or at least they may even make them mandatory for some engagements, like frauds over a certain amount or frauds in listed companies, for example. Okay, so that is always there. It's something that I wanted to just throw on the table. It's of course conjecture nature, but that's just something we need to be aware of as member of the institute. We should not feel like are we imposing too much burden on ourselves, because many times I hear this, and we want it's best that we clarify that as leaders, that is not the way we ought to be thinking. As leaders, we ought to be charting our own course before other people tell us. So, with that background, let's move on to the other part of the overarching documents. On the preface also gives you a quick overview on the manner of which standards were set. Okay, these standards are set in a very rigorous manner. I've got a sheet, a snapshot of the methodology that you see on the screen. I don't plan to go through each one of those 6 steps that are there. Just to suffice that it is a very rigorous process that we went through. Teams were formed for each of the 23 standards that were issued. Each team presented, went through a lot of deliberation and presented their findings and suggestions to the study group that was formed. And the other 2 speakers were also a part of the study group. Other than 10 other people, we had about 12 odd people who were part of the study group. And the study group was then charged with going through each and every standard, verbatim, word by word, and suggesting to that what to take forward. And issue first of all an exposure draft, which was exposed basically each standard was exposed for 30 days. And there was a lot of input that came from members and non-members and other experts. And all of their inputs were analyzed before these standards were finalized by the study group, re-approved by the DAB, then went to the council for approval, and then issued in their final form. So they got through a lot of thought process. And I must say, with each deliberation, they were made more and more robust, such that now when we implement them, we find that they really add a lot of value to the work that has to be completed, and really will give quality, high quality output once we use them very sincerely and implement them in a sincere manner. So that is the preface. Other than the preface, we have another overarching document in the form of framework. Framework is the manner in which basically the whole structure of the FIA is put together. It is summarized and depicted in the form of an axiom, as you can see on the screen, with the code of ethics forming the basis. the foundation, over which we have the four pillars that form the body of this knowledge, and they are of course covered by definitions. Certain key definitions are there as part of the whole agenda, and the definitions are clarifying terms like forensic accounting, what it is, and how it is a discovery and evaluation of evidence by the professional to interpret and communicate findings suitable for a court of law. Now, that is the key aspect of forensic accounting. The legal aspect, the court of law that you see the definition, for example, that is something very unusual in nature, and it is what makes forensic accounting very different than the other work that we do, the legal angle. And we'll talk more about that very soon. Investigation is the other domain that gets covered by these standards, and this basically takes forensic account to a next level. And it is a systematic and critical examination of facts and records in documents for a specific purpose. And of course, the purpose could be, unearthing frauds, for example. And so these definitions are certainly overall overarching definitions that come into play in all the standards. And like I say, the pillars, the four pillars of basic principles, which I will cover in a moment, that is one aspect of it. The 100 series key concepts is the other aspect of it. And then, of course, the main body of the knowledge are in the standards themselves. Now, the standards are the mandatory part that I have mentioned earlier. And the guidance that you see on the right-hand side, the fourth pillar, those are optional in nature. They basically get into the heart. Okay. They basically guidance notes help the professional to apply some of the standards and the concepts that are there. But of course, they principle based. These standards don't mandate or prescribe the steps in which the work needs to be done. They provide the expected outcome, and then the guidance notes kind of help the professional with this kind of an approach in case the member wants to get a better appreciation on how to proceed and do this work in a particular fashion. So that is what the objective of the guidance notes are, but they're optional in nature. And not of course, the other part that I want to mention, as far as the framework goes, that you see that each standard has got 6 sections. It's a fixed format. Each standard talks about, has an introduction and scope paragraphs. It talks about the objective of the standard. It then gets into the requirements and what is expected. Like the what that I was talking about. That comes under section 3 requirements. Explanatory comments that are elaborating on some of the requirements, which basically need more clarity and clarifications and elaboration. And also, maybe some of the terms get captured in the explanatory. Then, section 5 and 6 are on documentation that is expected of the professional. And 6 is the effective date from which these standards are so all these 23 standards, they follow a standard format of these 6-step approach, and they basically lay out the expectation in a very simple form. For example, there is no standard that you will find that is more than 4 or 5 pages. Okay, in these 4 or 5 pages, we cover all these 4 or 5 sections. And they basically are to the point and basically cover the crux of the whole matter in very short, succinct manner. So as you read them, you will find they're very readable and very easy to follow. Simple language, no complexities, no brain surgery required to do the work, or no shuttles to launch to the Mars to really understand it. So very simple stuff that you will find easy to follow and apply. Okay, so that is the framework. The next piece that I wanted to cover was in the area of definitions. Before I get to basic principles, let me just basically take you through in a very brief form what this forensic audit term is. Okay, most of you must have already come across something this mentioned in the media. In fact, media is the biggest culprit, I would say, in using or misusing this term called forensic audit. Actually, forensic audit is a misnomer of sorts. It's not forensic accounting and it's not fraud investigation. It's a misleading term, like I said, coined by non-professionals. Yeah. Because you see, audits is is something that culminates with the expression of, and which is not the case with forensic accounting. We don't express an opinion. We don't issue a report which expresses an opinion by the professional. Forensic, in fact, work culminates in the form of issuing a report that provides the evidence that is discovered. Like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about forensic audit, it is a exercise in gathering and collecting evidence. Okay, it's discovery of evidence. So the report by nature has to present that evidence as to what is the evidence that has been found, and that is presented to a court of law, and some judge will review the evidence presented by the professional, apply legal angles to it, legal aspects to it, and then the judge is the one who make a determination as to violation or no violation, innocence or guilt, and things like that. Which is why we have to be very careful when we use these terms. In forensic accounting work, there is no report issued that is passing any judgment. Okay, and I want to elaborate on these domains of forensic audit and investigation. In fact, four domains that you see on the screen. Now, this is not part of the FAIS literature. This is not part of our standards. This is implicit there, but the presentation that you see on the screen in the form of an infographic has just been prepared by me to clarify the terms in a little bit more simpler manner. Okay. So I'm presenting these four domains of statutory audit, forensic accounting. Many of you actually may be working in all four areas. Of course, some of you may be an expert in one or the other. There are many, of course, who have done statutory audits and are an expert in that area and are now venturing into the newer arenas of forensic and internal audit and even investigation. What you have to do is to put what you're dealing with. And that is the whole purpose of me bringing to the screen. The audit is a legal mandate. It's conducted can only be conducted by a chartered accountant. The end product is the expression of an independent opinion on the financial statements as per auditing standards. Now, if you look at internal audit, it's also partly legally New Companies Act Section 138 talked about the fact that certain organizations have to have an internal audit function and present their findings. So internal audit is partly optional, but internal audit can be conducted by non-CAs, as we know. Okay, and you don't have to be a practicing CA to conduct internal audit. Even in-house accountants or even non-accountants can be internal audits auditors, and their objective is different. They have to provide assurance to the management and they go beyond financials. They talked about operations also. They cover operations also. But if you are doing internal audits, then there are new standards coming out. The Institute of has issued certain internal auditing standards also. They are also not mandatory. They're in the process of becoming mandatory in the near future. Now, forensic accounting and investigation, on the other hand, that you see the right hand side, these are basically the newer areas that we're talking about, and these are different to the first two because, for example, forensic accounting is there to support legal cases, which is why legality is very important. Non-CAs are again permitted to conduct forensic accounting work. And the report of the findings are presented as evidence discovered. Okay, it's generally a list of findings, and they primarily focus on financial matters, which is why forensic accounting is key to the whole thing. They cover the domain of accounting primarily, financials. Now, these standards are becoming mandatory, and therefore, hopefully, we will see that all work is conducted using these standards. Investigation, on the other hand, goes beyond forensic. It applies forensic expertise to undertake more detailed work, primarily in the area of fraud and irregularities. Okay, it's getting into unethical dealings, and it's getting into matters that are pinpointing involvement of certain individuals. Up to now, the individual was can be ignored. If you're doing a statutory audit or internal audit or a forensic accounting work, individual does not matter. But when you start getting into investigation, you start talking about individuals who may have perpetrated a fraud. So anybody who can conduct investigation, again, you don't have to be a chartered accountant. The law allows anyone, including primarily enforcement agencies, to investigation. But of course, chartered accounting experts area also do a whole lot of investigative work. Now, the standard talks about no can be issued as part of the work because the job of pronouncing innocence or guilt is the job of the judge, not investigation. That is one of the standard example that we have. Voting will clarify that for you. But you have a situation. Now, let me spend a few minutes again clarifying each one of them a little bit so you understand why the approach in all of this is very different. For example, I'll go through this very briefly, so bear with me. Here, as auditors, the objective is that we present a clear picture. The focus is very general, overall review of the books of accounts. The approach that the professional takes is very control based, in the sense control test of transaction and kind of test of balance. That is the general approach taken. Because the target is to identify any statements in the financial statement. Overall, very broad objectives of looking for material misstatements. The skills that I need as a professional in statutory is basically testing and checking, analysis, inquiry, and observation. And the presumption that I make when I do the work is that that there is a professional skepticism. Okay, like what was mentioned earlier by Vaibhav, I think that we are historically being watchdogs, and now we're expected to become bulldogs. But if we're going to be a bulldog, then we cannot be doing a statutory audit. We have to put on our of forensics or investigation to do the bulldog work. Okay, that is why when we're doing statutory audit, we maintain our professional skepticism of watchdog, and we do our work with due professional care so that we have a high probability of identifying material mistakes. And the way we end our work is through an audit report qualification or unqualified audit report. Moving on, internal audit gets a little bit more into the detail, but still stays very general because the overall objective is to strengthen internal controls. And the focus is to review the systems and processes and the operations. So we go beyond the numbers into the operations. approach is again very broad based. We still at a high level. We don't get into individual transaction in gory detail. And because our focus is compliance, testing for compliance. Our target is to basically understand the root cause of any control breakdown or violation that we see. Okay, so we look for root cause analysis in all the findings that we present. Generally, they focus on why it happened and how to prevent it in future. The skills that I need as an internal auditor are basically testing and checking and inquiry and observation. And process expertise, of course, because everything is very process driven. And my presumption is that there can be honest and sincere mistakes. I'm not going to hang people because he made a mistake. Unless, of course, I have evidence to the contrary that points towards deliberate, action or unethical activity and things like that. Even then, I don't do that as part of my internal audit work. I stop at a point where I hand over my findings in the form of red flags to an investigative authority, because I cannot do an investigation as an internal auditor. Internal investigation requires different skill sets of interrogation, which is why my outcome stops at summary of findings and red flags. If some of my findings are pointing towards fraud or need for an investigation, I'll make that clear in my audit report. Okay, so that's internal audit for me. Now, forensic accounting gets into details now. Here we start getting into the transaction and balance level. My focus is narrower and discovering facts and evidence. My whole exercise is all about collecting and discovering evidence and things like that. My focus, my approach rather, is focus testing to confirm a suspicion that I may have or an allegation brought to my notice. I need to focus on testing to see whether that allegation or suspicion has merit. Okay, and my task is to basically confirm or deny the violation or allegation that has been brought to my notice. As a forensic expert, I present the facts, tell the hiding party whether there is a violation or not. Okay, whether there is a merit in the allegation. So skills I will use is scrutiny analysis, fact finding, interviews, things like that. Then I maintain my presumption is neutrality. It may happen, it may not be there. It may be guilty, it may be innocent. It may be a violation, it may not be a violation. Total neutrality, that is the presumption that I go with. Now, outcome is to present my findings in a court of law. I emphasize court of law because many times most of the forensic work finds its way to a court of law, which is therefore subject to cross-examination by the defending part. Okay, my work that I present can be torn apart by a very smart lawyer because he's done enough reading of the law and gained certain forensic knowledge, and therefore finds himself in a very strong position. The quality of my work has been substandard in nature. So keep that in mind as we go along. Investigation, of course, gets into the details like I mentioned. Here, the objective is to get into fraud and, if possible, even the culprit, identification of the culprit, because the evidence may point towards individuals. And as an investigator, it is my job to present evidence that will help somebody whether or not there is a fraud, and if there is a fraud, who may be the party. So the judge has to take the findings of the investigation and take those calls. Focus is very specific. Intent. See, as an investigator, our job is to basically collect evidence to prove intent. If you go by the definition of fraud, it talks about intent to deceive as the key term. So, as an investigator, my job is to collect that evidence that will help somebody make a determination on the intent. Okay, So that is the crux of the whole matter, and the approach is very hypothesis driven, and it basically talks about how something may have happened and how to go about collecting evidence, and therefore paint a picture of the whole modus operandi. How did the person do what they did, okay, and present the truth. So that is basically probing and those kind of skills come into play. The investigator has to have interrogation skills because it's all a mind game and things like that. And of course, there is something very critical that is has to be there for anybody to do an investigation, and that is predication. The presumption is that there is a probability of fraud, that there is some irregularity that needs to be unearthed. Okay, you may have heard the term, to catch a thief, think like a thief, and things like that. So you have to have that presumption, predication. That is the manner in which investigations are conducted. You presume there is some level of guilt there or violation, and go looking for the evidence using hypotheses and modus operandi. And the outcome in this whole exercise is basically a summary of findings and conclusions. Okay, no opinion on guilt or innocence, summary of findings and conclusions. That is why this is very important to understand all of this. So next time somebody is using the term forensic audit, please stop them on their tracks and say, no. Tell me, do you want me to do a forensic accounting work, or are you talking about audit? And if it is audit, then it's a different hat that I wear, it's a different mandate that I execute. I approach it very differently. If it's forensic, then please be clear. Make my mandate absolutely crystal clear as to what is it that you're expecting from me, so that there is no confusion in the outcome. Once you complete the exercise, people will start, you don't want people starting to ask you, oh, but wait a minute, you never told me who's the guilty party. It's not my job. It's the job of the judge. Okay, so we have to be very clear in these kind of things. Okay, so now let me just finish the discussion on the overarching documents with the basic principles. I don't want to dwell on it. It's a very good. It's very well explained in the whole standards itself. These are 10 basic principles. 5 relating to the attributes of the professional as to what makes him a true professional. He has to be independent. He has to have integrity. He has to have complete objectivity. He has to take professional care and keeps everything confidential. And he has the skills and expertise and the competence to do his job. And if he doesn't, he knows where to get it from. Okay, so those are the first of 5 basic principles that he needs to have. And then the manner in which he needs to do his job. Those are the next 5 basic principles. They talk about the contextualization of the situation, meaning every situation is unique and you need to look at the work that you do based on the elements that come into play at a particular point in time. Primacy of truth. Right? Everything revolves around finding truth, and truth is the #1 priority. The respecting the rights and obligations of others is also very important. You don't assume somebody to be guilty or somebody to be a culprit right at the beginning. You have to collect the evidence, let the evidence speak for itself, and also follow the principles of natural justice, which require us to present the findings to even the culprits and to get their defense as to why they are not or why the facts may be being read wrong, things like that. And because our job is to separate the facts from the opinions. And of course, we need to do our work with top quality and credibility. Okay, so that's the basic principles that we have to keep in mind. I want to now spend 4 minutes rather, on these key concepts that are there. I know I'm running out of time, but let me, the objective is not to make you an expert in these topics, but to introduce you to these concepts. Okay, so for example, 110, FEIS 110 on nature of engagement talks about forensic accounting, investigation, and things like that. I'm not going to dwell on it because I've already talked to you about forensic accounting and investigation and audit. And so what 110 says is that you as a professional needs to be very clear as to which mandate you have. And the mandate that you take cannot be an audit because then these standards will not apply to it. If you're doing an audit, of course, we have auditing standards for that. But if you're doing forensic accounting work or if you're doing investigation, or there could be a third element also, because sometimes because you are an expert, there are clients who may use you to help them in their court of law as litigation support. They may have lawyers, but they may also need forensic experts. So that is something you as a professional need to be very clear as to which one of those assignments are you undertaking. And the standard gets into the details of that. 120, on the other hand, talks about fraud risk. It introduces the concept of fraud. It introduces the concept of risk and how they come together. And it mandates that if you are doing any forensic work or if you're doing any investigative work, then you have to go on the assumption that there is basically a fraud risk element that may be at play here, and that we as professionals need to identify those fraud indicators or fraud risks and make sure that each one of them is getting addressed in a very reasonable manner. So it is incumbent upon the professional to make sure that you are starting off on that presumption of fraud risk with a list of fraud indicators so that they can be well addressed as part of your planning and execution. And so towards the end, when you are issuing your report, fraud risk again comes into play so that when you present your findings, your focus is on the high priority fraud risk areas and not get cluttered and digressed by minor, minor findings that may not have a big fraud risk element to it. So that is what 120 talks about. 130 mentions the fact that laws and regulation are a key element to the whole forensic area. Like I mentioned right at the beginning, forensic brings the legal angle into the work that we do. And it's very important that all laws and regulations are taken into account. 130 talks about the fact that you can be appointed in accordance with certain law or regulation. For example, IBC, in insolvency code is there. You as a forensic examiner may be appointed as per IBC, which gets into details of what is it that they expect you to do, including some of the procedures that I as a professional need to undertake. Or it could be a contractual arrangement between the professional and my client, board of directors, a promoter, or anybody who is appointing me and saying, well, look, I understand, I have certain suspicions that there is a fraud going on. Please help unearth, help me unearth the fraud. And you will say, okay, I will perform these procedures and present my findings to you. You will decide whether or not there is fraud as per the law. So these are the things that 130 talks about. It talks about the fact that laws and regulation is the crux of the whole FAIS on forensic accounting and investigation. It's a very, very major part of the whole agenda. In fact, we have to almost have dual qualifications of CA and law. That's how important it's become, quite honestly. But that's my personal. That's not what the standards say. Okay, lastly, 140 on applying hypothesis as a concept that you will come across more and more as you get into this area. Basically, hypothesis is a provisional, unproven theory which we make, which needs to be proven or rejected based on the evidence that we collect. It's applied differently to a forensic assignment vis-a-vis to an investigation. In the case of a forensic assignment, it may be just small part of it. For example, you may have a forensic assignment that talks about siphoning of funds. Okay, the bank may have appointed you as a forensic accountant to find out whether the loan monies have been siphoned off into personal accounts or not. Okay, so that may be a small piece of the whole thing, and your hypothesis would be drafted around looking for fund diversions. Whereas, you may, on the other hand, be appointed to unearth a major fraud, like a Nirav Modi case or something like that, with a lot of tentacles, and each tentacle has hypothesis, and you as a professional would need to undertake a full understanding of the whole scenario, including modus operandi, as to if somebody did a fraud, how did they do it? What were the opportunities that were exploited? What were the motives behind the whole thing? So it becomes a lot more elaborate, which is why applying hypothesis in the case of for an investigation is a lot more involved. It involves multiple hypotheses that have to come together and give you the whole jigsaw puzzle picture, overall picture. Okay, so that is what I all wanted to cover today. As part of this whole thing, I wanted to introduce you to the concept. I will now stop sharing the screen and I will go back to, hopefully you can see me better now. 1 second.
Thank you, Harish sir. I think in spite of disturbance in the connectivity due to bad weather, sir's presentation were itself good enough to understand the topic.
Okay, I hope you were at least able to see the and the content that was on the screen.
I'll just check the questions, sir, if there are any questions.
Okay, yeah. I don't see anything in the chat box. But the good thing is that we have Udayji is already there. I see Uday. Good evening, Uday sir.
Very good evening, sir. Very good evening. Harish bhai, very good evening.
Nice to see you again, back in action.
Yes.
So there's a question.
If there's any questions, I'll take those before we get there.
Yes, sir. There's one question. It's regarding transactions. Is asking what type of transactions allowed in CC account. In cases, we have seen that sometimes borrowers use CC account for purchasing assets or for purpose other than working capital. However, transfers back amount from other accounts. Whether this can be considered diversion of funds if funds are received back.
So wherever this is why I bring the legal angle into play. The answer to the question will lie in the details of the legality. It's the problem with the whole area of forensic investigation is that there is going to be a judge sitting in a court of law who will be reading the legal details, and he will be the one who will make the final determination as to whether or not there is a violation or a thing. So, a general question of the nature that is got posed will not be applicable because the whole scenarios are very different. One of the basic principles I talked about was contextualization of the whole situation, which means that the law and the manner in which we can apply in a certain scenario today might be different tomorrow. One company might be different than another company tomorrow. Okay. So it gets complicated and it requires looking at the whole situation, which is why I request the answer of the question to go back to the law. Wherever the mandate is coming from, or the mandate talks about looking at certain things, then you have to read the law and then make it collect the evidence, look at the law on the one hand, collect the evidence on the other, and then present the findings.
Yeah, I think there are no more questions, sir.
Okay, good. I will then go in the background and I will look forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Next session faculty, CA Uday Kulkarni is already joined us. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, all the participants. Good evening, Gauravji. Good evening, Vaibhavji. I hope my sound is clear to all of you.
Yes,
Is
sir.
it
Yes,
okay?
sir.
My sound.
Yes,
Very
sir.
much, very
Yeah.
much.
Yes, sir. It is clear.
And again, it's raining here. That's why I'm going to keep the video off so that the audio quality is going to be maintained all over the session, even with the question answers. I hope you can understand.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I think initially you can put on the video so that everybody sees you, sir.
Yeah, I will do that at the end of the session.
Yes, sir. So,
Uday sir, we want to see if you're
Yeah.
on to your faculty or not. So, Uday sir,
Yeah, I will do that, but at the end of the session.
okay. Glad to know.
okay.
Okay.
I'll briefly, it's my honor to briefly introduce you, CA Uday Kulkarni. CA Uday, sir, is a practicing chartered accountant with professional experience of 25 years. Fellow member of ICAI, Uday, sir, is certified internal auditor, also certified information system auditor, CISA. He is also qualified as insolvency professional under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of India. Uday sir has also completed digital forensic course. His focus area are information system audit, cyber security, forensic audit, and IBC advisory. Uday has wide experience in various types of information system audits, external audit, internal audit, fraud investigation, due diligence, etc. Sir has also appears before National Company Law Tribunal as authorized representative. Apart from practicing, Uday sir is the National Faculty for Bank Concurrent Certificate Course and Forensic Accounting Course of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has imparted training in various aspects of forensic auditing, money laundering, legal aspects, and cyber security for legal and investigating officers in Sri Lanka, Nepal, CA Institutes, RBI Academy, SFIO, SBI, Credit Risk Academy, NIBM, etc. So I present before you Uday Kulkarni, sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vaibhav sir. Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Yes.
I think Harishji has set the right tone and he has well discussed about the first thing what he has discussed about the difference between the various types of the audits and the forensic accounting. And I hope that now you have got the clarity about why we are titling these standards not as a forensic auditing, but as a forensic accounting and investigation standards. So there is a lot of thought process which we, while developing these standards, we put a lot of thoughts upon that, and then we came to the understanding that we have to differentiate between these other types of audits and the forensic accounting. And I think he has well explained about that, the different types of the audit, the skill sets, the outcomes, etc., and what is expected out of the forensic accounting and the investigations. So to continue with that, as we have seen that the standards are developed in series, and every series is addressing typical aspects of this forensic accounting and investigations engagements, assignments. So keep that tempo in view. We are going to discuss about the two series of the standards. First, we are going to discuss about the series 200 of the standards. And as the title you are going to watch here, it is talking about the engagement management. So when we actually start, or how can we say that if we are going to approach this assignment, what should be our approach? The detailed guidelines and the standards about that, that is what is explained, I can say. So the first part of this 200 is objectives of the engagements, and that is what is explained in 210, right? So the basic thing here one has to understand is that what is the objectives of the engagement? engagement's objective could be forensic accounting. It could be the investigation of success fraud and support. What is the nature of that engagement? I think what is the difference between the forensic accounting, investigation, all that I hope that has been explained in 110, the standard 110. Keeping that in mind, when we are engaging they understand the difference between the parts. All these engagement, what they are going to call as a forensic auditing normally, but right now we have changed the terminology to forensic accounting. But even in that case also, our related, but when that in that aspect, we should have a clarity about this, whether it is under the scope of forensic accounting, whether it is coming under the whether it is falling under the litigation. Why it is essential be required to do so, because according to that, according to the objectives, according to that, we have to define the scope, right? And also, we are going to apply upon the deciding the factor, the right. And in the standards now, to explain what we have that we have some illustrative or indicative list that what type of the assignment that could fall under the accounting system. Like in the A part of this PPT, we have on the indicative list of the forensic accounting. So that some of the entities or any entity have the final statement manipulations, right? So if the fraud is related to the financial statement manipulation, investigating or find out manipulation that can carry the financial statement, and we have to collect the evidences related to that. So that point,
Uday sir, I think we lost connection with Uday sir.
yeah, right. It is. Am I audible? Hello?
Sir, yes, sir.
Am I audible?
No, sir, voice is cracking.
Yeah, okay.
Voice is cracking, sir.
Is it okay now?
No, sir.
Hello?
No, sir.
Is it okay?
No, sir, voice is losing in between.
Okay, the connection is okay. It's okay. All the signals are up now. All the signals are up. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Voice. Hello, Vaibhav?
Yes, sir. So voice is cracking, sir.
Okay, just I will leave and I will rejoin with another connection.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, Vaibhav, what about now?
Yes, sir, it is much better. Clear.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah, I hope now it is okay with all of you. Vaibhav, please
Yes, sir,
confirm.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, it is clear, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So the second type of the services which is indicated here, let's talk about the funds diversion or asset tracing, right? So the question which was earlier there about the utilization of the funds. I mean, the question was related to that whether the CC amount which was used for purchase of the asset, whether that will fall under the category of any fraud or not. So if that kind of an questions are needs to be addressed, and if that kind of an evidences we have to gather about, so that type of an services will again fall under the forensic accounting kind of an services, right? Similarly, you can say that the money laundering related money trail, if we have to find out the money trail under the Money Laundering Act, that kind of an services are also coming under the forensic accounting services. So these type of the services, when the client is explaining us about the nature of financial dispute, we should be able to understand whether these are forensic accounting services or the B part, whether it is the investigation services, right? So possibly what could be the investigation services? Again, the indicative list is that fraud investigation itself. So there is a suspicious fraud and that needs to be investigated with the with, you can say, with the evidences. So that type of services will come under the investigation services. Insurance claim related disputes, ethical code or ethical code of conduct related violations related investigations, that kind of services will come under the investigation services. Similarly, bribery, corruption related financial disputes, that may also come under the investigation services. So again, differentiating point, I hope with this example, the participants may be getting clear idea what falls under the forensic accounting services, what falls under the investigation services. Similarly, what is the litigation support services? See, one of the opportunity which the forensic experts they are going to enjoy in future is about the litigation services. I mean, the more and more financial frauds or financial disputes cases, when they are going for the adjudication in the court of law or various adjudicating authorities, there the forensic expert may appear as a fact witness or as an expert witness, or it could be participative in the resolution mechanism. So all these three services are upcoming, I can say, and the opportunity could be that as fact witnesses, suppose you might have involved into the forensic accounting services where you have discovered some of the evidences, or suppose you have investigated some of the frauds on behalf of certain clients, but now the case is getting investigated by some of the agencies. In those cases, you will have to appear as a fact witnesses because you were involved and you have discovered some of the evidence related to that. So that kind of services will be under the fact witnesses. Expert witnesses, of course, that is something different area, and I think there is a separate standard which deals only with the fact witnesses, but it is not dealing with the expert witnesses. I will talk more about that when we are going toward that standards. So the objective of this standard is that the forensic expert, he or she should be able to differentiate between these three types of the services. And when we are accepting the engagement, we should be having a clarity enough about what type of services we are going to handle, and accordingly we have to communicate and we have to define the scope, and accordingly we have to submit our reports. That is very essential because all the stakeholders may not be aware about these three classifications in the forensic accounting area. Okay, so that is the first standard in the 200 series. The second standard, that is 220, talks about the engagement acceptance and appointment process. So when we are going to accept the assignment, when we are going to going ahead, now we are having a clarity about what type of an services we are going to deal with. Now the next process is that we are going to accept that assignment. So in that case, what stage or what stages in which we are going to accept the assignment. That has been clarified along with the letter of communication. That is what we call as an engagement letter. That is, and what are the contents? What should be the contents of that engagement letter? That has been defined, or that has been come out with this standard 220, right? So in the engagement acceptance and appointment, we have discussed here there are two stages which the professionals has to carry out. The first is about the preliminary procedures, right? So what the preliminary procedure is related to the proposed engagement. So before accepting that, he has to carry out the preliminary procedures. What could be the preliminary procedures that also has been discussed in the explanation part of this standards? We also have to identify the key stakeholders, since this forensic accounting or fraud investigations are a bit a sensitive issue. So there could be many parties who are interested in the findings from the forensic professionals. So it could be the stakeholder who is appointing us, the client, or the investigating agency who is appointing us. Apart from that, there could be customers, shareholders, legal authorities. All those are also, even the media, they are also the key stakeholders and the parties from whom we are going to collect the information or evidences or going to conduct interviews. All of those could be the key stakeholders. So in the preliminary process, if we can identify from which or to how many stakeholders who are with whom we are going to collect the evidences, with whom we are going to take the interview, all that things needs to be a part of preliminary procedures and the due diligences. And for that purposes, what is suggested through the standards is to issue the engagement letter, right? So engagement letter will give us the clarity to the appointing client, so that what we are going to deal first in the engagement letter, we are going to communicate with that stakeholder who is appointing us, that what is the nature of the assignment, as I have explained in 210. Similarly, what should be the contents in the engagement letter, that some of the, again, some of the indicative list, or you can say the examples of the contents we have provided in annexure 1 of this 220 standards. For example, in case of a nature of engagement, again, we are going to talk about the nature, whether it is accounting, forensic accounting services, or fraud investigation, or the litigation support kind of things. What could be the scope of that? What could be the nature and form of deliverables? So we can say about the reporting format, etc. The list of entities or functions or the geographical areas which we are going to cover. So that could be the some of the contents which we are going to communicate through this engagement letter. Also, we are going to communicate through this engagement letter about the access to the key personals or officials. If we require the assistance from the third party, suppose we are going to collect the evidences from some data centers which is going to be managed by the third parties, or the data digital evidences which could be in the cloud environment. So in that case, we may require the cooperation, coordination from the third parties. So all that points needs to be covered in this engagement letter. So standard has come out with that points, examples of what should be the contents in this engagement letter. And I think that is going to be help a lot to the forensic professionals when they are going to accept the appointment as a forensic professional, right? The next standard, 230, is going to deal with using the work of an expert. See, this is a teamwork. And right now, many of the organization entities, for their business purposes, for their accounting purposes or business processes, accounting processes, they are going to use, or they are using the digital environment, right? And there are a number of transactions. So we may require some of the specialized skill sets, like the expertise in the discovery of the evidences in the digital domain, We may require expertise in the field of data analysis. So this could be the typical area in which all the forensic professionals may not be expert, right? Or there could be some typical business situations or the typical businesses where the forensic professional may not have a knowledge about that particular business or that particular business processes. In such a situation, when we are accepting the engagement, as I said, in the preliminary process, we are going to evaluate whether all these skill sets are going to be with us or not as a part of 220. And on that, in that preliminary procedure, if it is coming to our knowledge that some of the skill sets are not with us, then of course we are going to take the help of an expert, right? So who is that expert? The standard has come out with the definition of the expert. So on your left-hand side, you can see the definition of the expert, the person possessing some of the special skills or the domain expertise, and along with the experience also. So the standard has defined to whom we can call the expert. We have to define the areas where we require the skill set of the expert. As I given the example, so we may require the skill set for collection of the digital evidences. We may require the skill set of the expert for data analysis. This could be just an example. So we can take the help, but before appointing or before taking the help of such an expert, what is required? That has explained, because ultimately the forensic professional is going to submit the report and he is going to take the responsibility about whatever the findings he is going to report in that forensic report. And for that purpose, when we are appointing the expert's comments, the expert's observation, we are definitely going to include in our report. Now, for that purpose, some of the requirement of that experts that has been defined in this 230. So independence and objectivity of the expert, relationship of an expert, his personal interest also that needs to be reviewed. So first we are going to define who is the person to whom we are going to call an expert. That is the first part. Second, as a basic principles which we are following as explained by the Harish ji, the same principles will be applicable to the person to whom we are going to appoint as an expert. So what is his qualification? What is his credential? What is his independence and objectivity? All that principles we are going to verify, review before appointing him as an expert for our assignment. Second thing is that we are going to define the scope of that expertise area. It's like that we are having 4 or 5 areas we are going to deal in that forensic assignment. But a particular area like analysis part, analytical part, we are going to give it to the expert. What is his scope? What he is going to deliver to us? That kind of an understanding or that kind of an agreement we are going to enter into when we are going to use the services of an expert. Next part is that when the expert is going to submit his observations, his comments or his findings, which could be the part of our report, then what could be the procedure? How we are going to discuss with him about his findings, what points we are going to check before including those points in our forensic report, how we can validate his outcome. All these things could be the part of the agreement or the procedures of using the work of an expert. And that thing has come out with the specialized standard 230. Right. The next is 240. That is engaging with the agencies. What is engaging with the agencies? So forensic professionals may get the assignments, engagements, not only from the clients like companies or some of the entities, but they are going to be appointed by various agencies. Now, who are the agencies? Again, we have defined who are the agencies. So this could be the law enforcement agencies like the ED, Enforcement Directorate, CBI, or it could be police, economic open swing, or SFIO. So these are the agencies which are going to appoint for some of the forensic work to the forensic professionals. Apart from that, regulatory bodies like the RBI, the SEBI, those bodies also going to appoint the forensic professionals for the forensic work. And of course, the adjudicating authorities like the tribunals or judicial authorities, they are also going to appoint the forensic professional for the forensic engagement. So all these agencies we have defined as a we have defined as an agencies under which from whom we are going to get an opportunity for the forensic assignment. Now all these agencies, they are having their own protocols because they are governed by their some specific laws. Like the CBI, it is governed by specific laws. Directorate of Enforcement, it is governed by some specific protocols, right? And when we are going to engage with them, it is expected that the forensic professional is aware about those legal aspects or aware about the protocols under which the agencies are working, and similarly, under which laws they are going to appoint us, because they are handling numerous cases under the numerous laws. So when we are going to be engaged by these agencies, we should have a clarity about which laws under which they are expecting our forensic accounting services or investigating services or even the litigation support services. So we should be having the knowledge of all these things. Again, in these cases, what is our roles and responsibilities when we are going to deal with in a different roles as a forensic accountant or in the fraud investigation or in the litigation support? What is our scope of work? What is our roles and responsibilities that needs to be well communicated with these agencies? Again, the engagement letter would be a better document which will communicate to them about the scope, our roles and responsibilities, and the expected outcome which the agencies are expecting. They may have their own reporting format. They may expect some of the evidences rather than the reporting. So all these things we have to understand, and we have to accordingly conduct these assignments. So that is what is explained in this 240 kind of an standards. We have also given the agencies, the examples of the agencies, as I have already told you, like CBI, ED, the list of the agencies from where we are going to be appointed, and all the things. I think many of the professionals who have participated, they are well aware about that, right? The next standard is 250. It is dealing with the communications with the stakeholders. As I have already discussed that in this forensic accounting or investigation services, which are very sensitive matters, there are many stakeholders. Some may be the direct stakeholders who are going to appoint us. Like suppose a company or the board of directors, they are going to appoint us when they are having some suspect in their mind about the possibility of the frauds in some of the areas. Some of the agencies, which I have already mentioned, the CBI, police, they are going to appoint us. Apart from that, there are other stakeholders who are interested in our reports, including media. And for collection of the evidences, we may have to inquire with various third parties, we can say, like the suppliers, vendors, service providers. They are also, all of them are forming part of the stakeholders. Now looking at the number of stakeholders, what we have done, because we have to communicate for various reasons to the stakeholders. Now, important part of the standard is that, which I think we have defined here, is the definition of communication. What is communication? When we are talking about the communication with the stakeholders, in the standards, we have defined the communication. So the communication includes the verbal communication, written communication, digital communication. It could be in any format, like it could be in the documents, it could be in the text messages, videos, images, all that. Right now, whatever the sources or the modes which we are using to communicate for sharing of a different types of the information or the data, that we are going to call it or address it as a communication. Now, to whom shall we communicate? What is the responsibility of the forensic professional? Whether he is going to communicate everything with all the stakeholders? The answer is no. And that's why we have classified the stakeholders into two parts. One, primary stakeholders, and second, other stakeholders. So who are the primary stakeholders? The primary stakeholders are the appointing authorities. For our purposes, we can say they are the clients. So appointing authorities. So it could be board of directors, it could be audit committee, it could be the enforcement agency, it could be adjudicating authorities. All of them could be the appointing authority. And those stakeholders we are going to call as a primary stakeholders. Other than the primary stakeholders, all other stakeholders like the vendors, suppliers, service providers, all those are the other stakeholders. Now, what is the responsibility of the forensic professional? Forensic professional's responsibility is clearly mentioned here, is to communicate only directly with the primary stakeholders. So whatever the things he wanted to communicate, because he has to communicate engagement letter, he has to communicate scope, he has to communicate even the fees, right? Professional fees. All those communication directly should happen with the primary stakeholders. Some of the things which he may have to communicate with the other stakeholders. So what he should do when he is going to communicate with the other stakeholders, that also we have clarified in this 250. And that is very, very important, because sometimes when there is a large scam, there is a big fraud, the media is behind that, and the forensic professionals may have to answer the questions from the media, or even in some cases, the forensic professional has to appear before the adjudicating authorities, which is not the primary stakeholders in some cases. So how to handle all this communication, that has been disclosed. So here, if you look at the point number 6 here, communication with the public or media shall be avoided. That is what we have communicated, we have addressed through these standards. Now the thing is that what we are going to communicate with the primary stakeholders. So we have classified those matters as essential matters and significant matters. There could be a lot of communication, but the forensic professional has to classify that which is the matter which is mostly or essentially be required to be communicated, and which is the matter which is going to affect our assignment or engagement, that we are calling it as a significant matter which needs to be communicated with the primary stakeholders. So examples of these are like that: essential matters, what is the scope, what is the methodology. Again, it depends upon the nature of the assignment. So what is the nature of the assignment? Accordingly, what is the scope? What is the methodology which we are going to discover the evidences? Then written process or protocol, as I said, because if we are going to be appointed with some of the investigating agencies like the EDs or the Anti-Corruption Bureau, then they are having their own protocols, they are having their own hierarchy. So we need to set a protocol that which matters to be communicated at what level and how. So that protocol is also very importantly be communicated while accepting the assignment. Then what type of support and cooperation is required to gather the evidences? that kind of matters are all, because as I said, we may have to visit some of the vendors or service providers, but that thing first we need to communicate as essential matters to the primary stakeholders. And most importantly, if you can notice that engagement fees, that needs to be communicated with the primary stakeholders. The reporting format, which is not fixed by the standard, it depends upon the nature and the scope of the assignment, and also in some cases that might have been prefixed by the appointing agency. So what could be the reporting format? That is very, very important part of the communication, because बाद में it should not be a dispute, like they are expecting the reporting format in a different way and we are submitting the report in some other ways. So to avoid that kind of an confusion at the last minute, at the end of the assignment, I think all these things needs to be communicated as a part of the essential matter to whom? To the primary stakeholders. What are the significant matters which we are going to handle? So significant matters which are going to create some disturbances, which needs to be communicated immediately to the primary stakeholders. So we can say the matters are going to affect our methodology, matters which are going to affect the evidences, and ultimately because of that, it is going to affect our reporting part also, findings also. So those matters, we are calling it as a significant matters. So what could be those? So lack of cooperation by the stakeholders. So in loan disputes, suppose the borrower is not cooperating. Borrower is not giving us details about the evidences, or he is not cooperating by giving us access to his accounting records, something like that. So that kind of things comes under the lack of cooperation by one of the stakeholders. Or he's cooperating, but he's cooperating with certain amount of delays. And that's why we are not going to finish the assignment within the scheduled time. Sometimes the evidences are going to be destroyed or altered. Volatility of the digital evidences, everybody knows. So in that cases, if some evidences are going to be altered or destroyed by some of the stakeholders, that kind of matters are also required to be communicated as a significant matter. Break in chain of custody of evidences. In some cases, it may also be possible that the forensic professional's life is under the threat. Some of the fraudsters or suspected fraudsters, he's trying to give some, life-threatening kind of statements. So all these things could be going to affect or having the impact on our findings, and these things needs to be communicated to the primary stakeholders again as a significant matters. Again, the significant matters which are affecting the work, which are affecting the assignment, and thereby which is affecting our findings, all these things again needs to be reported. I think that has been covered up in the reporting standard, but importance of those at the first level communication under 250 is very, very essential, and that has been outcome of this 250. The next series is 300 series. The 300 series is about the execution of the assignment. Here we are directly going to discuss about the standards which are on the performance of the assignment. So the first part of any assignment is the planning of the assignment, right? And we all are aware about that we plan for audit, right? We plan for other types of the engagement also, but planning for forensic work is a bit explanation about the difference. What is the difference between the engagement and the assignment? So you can come out with the idea that assignment is a subpart or a small part of the total engagement. Now here, we have to ensure that whatever is we are going to plan about that particular forensic assignment, that should be in line with the scope of work. Now, the scope of work, again, you can understand the chain. The scope of work depends upon the nature of engagement, forensic accounting, fraud investigation, litigation services, litigation support services. Accordingly, the scope will be there. Once the scope will be fixed, then you can start the planning process. But before planning process, I hope you can remember the 220, which talks about the preliminary procedure, due diligence, contextualization of the situation, which is the basic principle we have explained, right? So all these things needs to be kept in mind when we are trying for a planning of a particular assignment. Now, as a part of the planning, what is essentially be required when we are going to plan a forensic assignment? As we know that when we are going to plan for the audit, whether it be the statutory audit or internal audit, the punchline we basically talk about is the understanding of the business of the auditee. I'm talking about the audit, but here similar kind of a thing is required. When we are going to engage in the forensic assignment, similar requirement is there that we should have a knowledge about the business, the environment, the business processes. Then the risk consideration, the fraud risk, which normally we call it a red flags. If we are having the knowledge about the businesses, here the knowledge of the businesses means the business processes, how the business processes are configured in the digital environment, what could be the weaknesses, and thereby what could be the possibilities of the red flags. All those risk considerations could be considered when we are going to plan about the engagement or assignment. And it is well said that normally 60% of our time should be involved in the planning, 30% in execution, and 10% in the reporting. But what happens is exactly the reverse process. We spend 10% in the planning, 60% in the execution, and 30% in the reporting. So to avoid that, if we plan perfectly, then we can cover up the field level work, ground level work within a 30% time limit. And we can spend 10% on the reporting aspect. Because as a part of the planning, if we know what could be the reporting format, what could be the expectations out of that report, I think we can plan a better by knowing that. And that is what is considered as a planning process. And for that purpose, for reporting expectation of the outcome or to understand the suspicious fraud, its background, it's not the story listening, but its background, we may have to discuss a lot of time with the stakeholders who is appointing us so that we may get a clarity and we can define the scope. And once we can define the scope, we can define the methodology, and accordingly we can think about the deployment of the technology, use of the expert, work of the expert. All that things will come simultaneously once we have a clarity about the assignment. At the planning process, again, we should have a knowledge about the legal aspects. If the assignment could be under certain laws, under the specific law, or it could end up with the provision of certain laws. At the time of the acceptance of the assignment, it may not be having the clarity that it is as per the Money Laundering Act or as per the Company Act or as per the General IPC Act, but could land up at the outcome stage into that kind of an legal provisions. So that knowledge is also essential when we are planning about that. And accordingly, we have to define our methodology. It includes the hypothesis testing. Because in case of fraud investigations, there could be a number of possibilities for which we have to develop the hypothesis. testing of the hypothesis is also one of the factors which needs to be considered when we are planning for the assignment. T20 is talking about the evidence and documentation. See, I think Harishji has rightly explained in the earlier slides, in his earlier discussions. Forensic assignments are fact-finding, and more importantly, the forensic assignments are for collection of the evidences. Now, there is a difference between the audit evidences and evidences which we are gathered under the forensic services. To give an example, for audit purposes, we may rely upon the bank statement, which could have been downloaded from an internet site of a bank through the internet banking. We may accept that as an audit evidence to confirm the balances at the year end. But the question is whether the same statement is going to be acceptable as an evidence in the court of law, because the forensic is related to the collection of the evidences, gathering of the evidences, which is acceptable to the court of law. Many of the times we are having the confusion when we take a printouts. Let us say we are taking the printouts of some of the ledger extracts from the books of accounts. So we may have in our mind that ledger extract is a sufficient evidence as a paper evidence. But whether that falls under the paper evidence, whether it falls under the electronic evidence, whether additional requirement related to the books of accounts, or since it becomes an electronic evidences, some additional conditions are there in the Indian Evidence Acts, whether those are going to be complied with or not, that the forensic professional has to understand. And that's why once, if you look at the first para of this, obtain the evidence from reliable sources. Suppose for some financial disputes, we may require the income tax return of a particular party. And now one of our chartered accountant friend is handling the taxation matter of the disputed party. So either whether it is acceptable that we may visit the friend and collect that income tax return copy and submit it as an evidence, whether that is going to be acceptable as an evidence, that is the key question. Because there are defined processes by which the evidences needs to be collected and which are going to be accepted in the court of law. The financial statements, whether simply downloading the financial statements from any site, it could be evidence, but whether it is going to be acceptable in the court of law, that's why the first point here is talking about the obtain the evidence from reliable sources, and the procedure for discovery of the evidence is appropriate, which is also the procedure of discovering the evidence should also be appropriate as per the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act. We have defined what is evidence and what is documentation. Why this definition and why this standard is there? Because many of the times, the forensic professional should have a clarity about, see, evidence are those information, it could be written information, it could be electronic, form-based information, which we are treating as an evidence, which we are submitting along with our report, and on the basis of that evidence, we are giving the conclusion in our report. That is what is defined as an evidence. We are going to use a lot of documentation. Suppose we are preparing the interview questions. We are defining some of the methodologies. We are communicating with the service providers for the discovery of the evidences. All those could be our working papers. In the audit terminology, we call it as a working papers. That is what we have mentioned here as a documentation. Documentation are not supposed to be shared with the forensic report, but evidences are required to be submitted along with the forensic report. And since, as I said, the forensic expert, he or she may have a knowledge about the difference between the evidence and documentation, but the team, as I say, we are going to work in this forensic assignment as a team. In that case, whether the team is having the knowledge about the difference between the evidence and documentation, that is equally important. And as a part of the training to them, I think the forensic professional should impart the difference with them also. That is what is coming out with the 320 as a difference between the evidence and documentation. 330 is talking about the conducting the work procedures. So this is actually the execution of our methodologies, including the testing of the hypothesis. So once we have defined the methodologies in the planning stage, then we have to develop the work procedures. So suppose we may have to conduct the interviews. We may have to visit to the suppliers. We may have to collect the evidences in the digital domain. How we are going to do that? That is the development of the work procedures. For that purposes, we may have to use different types of the tools. Suppose there are millions of transactions, and out of those transactions, we may have to find out some of the suspicious fraudulent transactions. To identify those, we may use the analytics tools, or we may use the Excel analysis. For gathering of the evidences in the digital domain, we may have to use the digital forensic tools. So how we are going to discover that evidences? Whether we are going to deploy any specific tools, techniques, any software, if we are going to record the interviews, how we are going to record that, all that work procedures needs to be defined as a part of the conducting of a work procedures. Work procedures, we have bifurcated into two phases. Phase one, behind the scene. What is behind the scene? Behind the scene means there is a little or no interactions with the stakeholders. What could be that? The nature of the evidence is required for the possible violation of code of conducts or manipulation in the financial statement. Suppose that is the case, then what kind of an evidence we may require? That kind of an brainstorming is required. That could be at the phase one level. We may have to collect the various data. As I said, if there are millions of transactions, we may have to collect all those transactions. When at that time we are not going to interact with anybody, but we are thinking that, okay, these number of transactions are there and we have to process all these transactions using some of the analytical tools or techniques. So that could be the possibility under the phase one. Then we may have to develop some of the questions or checklist to conduct the interviews. That also could be, we can develop as a part of the phase one. Phase two is, you can say, the field work, right? Where we have actually visit the number of places, or we have to use the techniques to collect or gather those evidences. That is a direct interactions with the relevant stakeholders for collecting of the evidences. So that could be that some of the examples of that could be physical verification of certain things for corroborating the facts. We have to identify the key individuals with whom we are going to inquire or going to interview. So all these things could be possibly covered up under the phase two. So to schedule this phase one and phase two procedure, that is also be the part of 330 conducting the work procedure, and all these things needs to be well documented. So how we have started phase one, what we are going to cover in the phase one, and what we are going to cover in the phase one, all that documentation is very, very important to demonstrate that we have complied with this 330 standard. 340 is an important part, conducting the interviews. Interviews are essentially be required. We all know the importance of the interview for collection of the evidences, or we may sometimes get the triggers about the sources from which we may collect the interviews. One can understand that interview is a personal skill set, because what needs to be asked, what needs to be inquired, how the questions need to be plotted for the interview, that is some job which will require some type of a skill. And here when we are talking about the interview, in the standards, we have defined what is interview. So it is a structured meeting with an individual for obtaining some of the information. That information we are going to corroborate with the documentary evidences, or as I said, which will give the indications for further collection of certain evidences. Both ways, the interviews are going to be useful. And for interview, as I said, because there could be some direct questions, there may be some indirect questions, but the objective should be very clear. And that's why the methodology about the interview is one of the important aspects about conducting the interviews, because it is not like the direct questions, you will get the direct answers and you will get the direct evidences. Sometimes you will have to place some tricky questions. Sometimes you will have to make him round about the topics, and then you will have to, from different sub types of the questions, you will have to collect the triggers, so that the person with whom we are conducting the interview, he or she may not be tried to avoid anything by the direct answering to or some questions. So that skill set needs to be developed. For that part, we should be always keep in mind while developing these questions that what is the objectives behind placing that 10, 20, 50 questions, whether it is direct or indirect, in the interview. And that questions ultimately be linked with our objective of the assignment, linked with our scope of work of our assignments. And ultimately, it should be come out with some of the important facts which will be helpful either as an evidence or which will be helpful to collect the further evidence. And for that purpose, how to prepare about the interviews, how to ensure that the statements obtained, suppose in some cases it may be possible that the one of the party in the interview, he or she may confess about the guilt or accept that yes, they were a party to the fraud. So how to handle that statement, keeping again in mind the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act. And for that purpose, when we are going to conduct the interview, we should be well prepared. The questions needs to be well developed. The methodology of that should be, methodology means how to place the questions during the interview. That also needs to be developed. Then list of key themes are the, as per the objectives or as per the scope, the questions needs to be plotted. All these things are necessarily be covered up as a preparatory part of conducting the interviews, and that is whole we have discussed in this 340 standard. One of the important outcome of all these standards in every standard in para 5, because many times it is questionable that how one can say that we have complied with the standards. I think Hariji might have discussed with you that every standard in their para 5 are discussing about the documentations part. So that documentation will demonstrate that you have complied with the standards. So as a part of this conducting the interviews, what documentation we have suggested, I'm just mentioning the minutes of the interview may be circulated. A declaration or signed statement may be taken from the interviewee. as a safeguard of our professional interest. So all these things which will demonstrate that we have complied with the standards, and in each standard, as I said in para 5, we have defined a set of the documentation. Of course, that is illustrative one. You can add another documents into that, but that will suffice to say that whatever be the assignments we have conducted as per, or we have complied the requirement of this FAIS. The next standard is 350 under the standard series category that talks about the review and the supervision. Again, I already said that it is a teamwork. The efforts of all the team members needs to be targeted towards the fact finding and the evidence collection. As I said, some of the members may be well aware about what is evidence. They may not be aware about what is evidence. So it is possible that some of the members may come with some documentation which may not fall under the category of the evidence. So in that case, whatever be their efforts, all that efforts needs to be reviewed. So what is review and what is supervision? We have segregated. So what is review? That is the examination of work performed and the documentation. And that needs to be planned. In the planning stage, we have to plan for review and supervision also. So under the review, whatever be the outcome which is coming out by the work performed by the team members, that needs to be reviewed, so that we be comfort with, that will give us a comfort as a forensic professional that, okay, whatever they are collecting, it is not merely a document, but it is going to be helpful as a part of an evidence. Or whatever be the procedure he or she is going to perform, all that efforts are towards the gathering of an evidence. It's not like that. Suppose the interview may not end up as only a discussion and you are getting nothing out of that. So that should not happen. So to control that things, our team members' work needs to be timely reviewed so that we will be able to complete the assignments with a perfect direction. Supervision is the, again, oversight of the team and the provision of guidance. Right. So under the supervision, as per the scheduled, as per the plan, we are definitely going to schedule the methodologies, we are going to schedule the work procedures. So whether according to that, the assignment is getting progressed or not, that also is a part of the supervision. So we have to ensure that planned work procedures are getting complied, evidences are discovered are appropriate, they are sufficient. All the work which is performed by our team member, that is as per the requirement of the standards or as per the requirement of the objective of that assignment. There is a possibility that sometimes there could be the change in the circumstances, as I said, the matters which are going to affect significantly on our assignment or on our findings. So in that case, we may have to develop alternative methodologies. That also needs to be supervised. And essentially, all these things needs to be ended up within a timely manner, within the scheduled time. So all these things are explained in this 350 as a review and supervision as a part of the 300 series. 360 series is talking about the testifying before the competent authority.
Uday sir, sorry to disturb you, but how much more time it requires, sir? Because
this is the last standard.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
I can understand that 200 and 300 series are having number of standards.
Yes, sir. No, next faculty is also joined.
Yes. So I will finish that within 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And over to Shailesh. Okay. So testifying before a competent authority. So in the 110 and 210, we have discussed that the nature of the engagement. In that, we discussed that litigation support is one of the area. That is an opportunity for the forensic professional. So what is the testifying before the competent authority? So as I said, all this forensic is a part of the legal proceedings. Either we are going to be appointed by the investigating agencies, or even if you are appointed by certain companies, the matter will go to the adjudicating authorities, and there we may have to appear for certain witnesses, because we have conducted the investigations, we have discovered the evidences, and what procedures we have followed for that. And they are going to put to us certain questions about the methodologies, about the findings, about the evidences, all that things. So that is called as a testifying before the competent authorities. Who could be the competent authorities? Of course, it could be the investigating agencies again, it could be the court, it could be the adjudicating authorities. There we are going to appear either as a fact witness or an expert witness. But as I said, the standard is not going to cover our testifying as an expert witness, because expert witness, that is something dealt with by the Indian Evidence Act, and that is not covered in this 360. But what here we have covered, that when we are investigating a fraud, when we are discovering the evidences, some of the questions, some of the methodologies, some of our procedures might be explained. The core modus operandi of the fraud might be explained, which could be questioned by these authorities. So that we call it as a fact witness. So when we are going to appear in the fact witness, what we should do? So basic principles about the independence, objectivity, conflict of interest, all that we have to follow, and basic questions that may arise about the confidentiality. But here, what we are going to tell, because this is a part of the legal proceedings, so possibly we may have to cross that confidentiality kind of an principle here. So how to give the information, how to appear before them, because again, they may have their own protocols, and how to prepare for that. All these things, I think that is covered in this 360 as a appearing before this authority under the fact witnesses. So I think I have taken 10 minutes more than the allotted time for it. I think now Shailesh is here, so I will stop myself from the further standards. Is there any questions, I would be happy to answer that. Otherwise, I would like to call upon Shailesh ji for the further discussions of other standards.
Thank you, Uday sir. I'll just check the questions if there are any. There are no questions, sir.
Okay, thank you, Vaibhuji. Thank you very much.
Sir. That concludes our second session. Moving forward for the third technical session, Shailesh sir has already joined us. I will introduce you to Shailesh sir. Shailesh Kaushik sir, a professional with over 15 years of petroleum industry, about 10 years in IT consulting, and the last few years in accounting and audit practice. He is a chartered accountant by qualification and also a certified information system auditor. His key skills include coaching and mentoring IT, banking, and accounting professionals, as well as developing curriculum and course material for courses, business process analysis, break down complex processes to identify data processing needs and build solutions focused on customers, change management, help understand, prepare for the accept change and related disruption that accompanies it, control, review, and investigation, identify control weaknesses and data gaps, expose fraud opportunities and pressures. He is comfortable working in multicultural environments and has managed global ERP implementation projects for Fortune 50 client and traveled Europe, Africa, Asia, America, and handled portfolios as diverse as program management, risk assessment, change management, governance, and control review. That is very versatile personality with us today. We welcome you, Shailesh sir, and over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Vaibhavji. And it's a great honor to be part of this webinar on the forensic standards. I am traveling and I was having some issues with the internet. Hopefully they are sorted now. If there is anything, I will message tech support.
Yes, sir.
And it's always a little difficult to take the last session on a Friday. I am between you and your dinner, and I'm between you and the weekend. And there's nothing like a Goa weekend. And since it's organized from Goa, I will try to finish within the time. The areas I will be covering are about quality. There are some special standards related to data analysis and evidence discovery and loans and borrowings. And then we'll do a standard on reporting. One request to Vaibhavji, if there are questions, please feel free to interrupt me. It's better that if someone has something they are taken up
Yes, sir. Sure.
immediately rather than we cover it at the end when the topic relevance may not be there. So please absolutely free to interrupt if anyone has a question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
So let's first start. The quality standard is actually the last standard in the set of standards. But having come immediately after Udayji and Harishji, I think it's a bit appropriate to start with the quality standard. So first, let's look at some quality definitions. In fact, the quality standard has been covered by Harish and Uday in their presentations to you. And the quality standard is just a summary. So in general, a quality standard basically has requirements, specifications, guidelines to meet the purpose of a product or service. ISO standards are very commonly adopted in industry. Our standards, like the earlier people would have covered, are there to provide a minimum standard of service as a forensic professional. Now, how do we do that? We have a quality process and we follow the standards which are prescribed, whether we are gathering evidence, like Uday explained, whether we are taking interviews, whether we are planning our work, whether we are adopting the right work procedures, whether we supervise the work, and all the things which were covered in the earlier presentations. These are the standards, and there's a standard expected from the professional that you should contextualize situations, you should have the primacy of truth, integrity, professionalism. Those are the standards. But there's another way of looking at quality. And it's a very nice definition, which comes from Peter Drucker. He talks about quality. You may follow everything you want. And coming from a little bit of a information systems background, we used to have a whole lot of quality frameworks. But in the end, what matters is the client or customer happy? Because we could put in enormous effort in making a successful investigation, or a successful product, or a successful service. At the end of the day, the person who determines the success or failure of the quality is the client. Now, this slide is interesting because first we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the client. Like in the picture, you have a cafe. The owner likes to bake, for example, and he's got lots of books. Now, does the crowd like what he bakes? Are they interested in the kind of books that he's put up? Or is that an extension of how he wants his cafe to look? Makes a big difference. The decor can be very good. The books may be very interesting to the owner and his friends, But is that the kind of cafe people want? That's what we shouldn't miss. Now, in forensic investigations, this is complicated because we have multiple stakeholders, not one, as was covered in the, and you can't please everyone. You have the banks, you have the regulators outside of the banks, you have the borrowers, you have the creditors of the organization, and you have the people who are part of that organization which you're investigating. Now, each one of them sees the entire investigation from a different standpoint. And like's been explained so well by Uday, when we do a forensic investigation, we are primarily looking at transactional responsibility. And my experience in the course of an investigation, several matters come up which are not pleasant to most people. Like, if I am looking at a default by a borrower, and we'll come to loans and borrowing specifically, but if I am looking at a default by a borrower and appointed by the bank to see whether there is a willful default, whether there is a siphoning or a diversion, I may find that. But I may also find that adequate monitoring was not done by the bank. That the bank had enough indications, let us say, in the report submitted to it, in the stock reports, in the report submitted for drawings, in something out of the concurrent audit reports and internal investigative reports, that everything was not right and the account was in decline. And this happened several times. But as an investigator appointed by the bank, I submit it to the banker. And bankers usually do not like these kinds of things to find a place in the final report. Suppose we do find a fraud has happened. Then it does go to an investigating agency. And there again, their level of satisfaction would be that everything you said is backed up by evidence which is admissible in a court of law, like Uday has explained. Or maybe Harish did that also. So every one of these and behind all this is the borrower and his team. They want to be treated fairly. So here, Peter Drucker is not that relevant as he is in our regular work. So a more appropriate way of looking at it is Henry Ford. It is doing what is right. It doesn't matter whether someone is looking or not looking. Report objectively, report factually, eliminate bias in following the work procedures, don't do them selectively. And I think to a large extent, we would have met what the standards are expecting from us. And we would meet the quality standards, which basically talks of exactly what we discussed now. These stakeholders are the best judge of acceptable quality. Multiple stakeholders, each one has their expectation. And the expectations, like we explained, are conflicting. The best we can do is be objective, be factual, and don't let bias come into play, and state only matters for which there is credible supporting evidence. And this largely comes from maintaining the documentation which is mentioned in every standard, in having a review of work performance, and the whole thing should be part of a QCS. which is a quality control system. Now, there is a recognition that levels of firms which do forensic investigation vary in terms of size, in terms of the kinds of assignments they do, and the nature of assignments they do. So it would be fair to say that whatever quality control you do needs to be appropriate to the level of your firm and needs to be able to support the assignments which you undertake. So if a small firm undertakes a very large assignment, the quality control would have to grow to match the requirements of the assignment. All right. Now let's come to some of the specific standards in this section. The first one is about applying data analysis. Now, this, I think, is one of the most difficult parts of any assignment. Forensic assignments by nature go over about 8 years at a minimum. And in many of the cases, it's difficult to find credible sources of data. The reason why it is difficult to find credible sources of data are multifold. One is organizations go through so much change over this kind of period. They change systems, they change places where they store data. If I look at the last 8 years, possibly they used to store stuff on individual computers, maybe 2013-14. They moved to a server somewhere in the middle. A couple of years back, they moved to a cloud. As the company grew, it's changed its accounting systems. They've added and bolted on additional programs to help them run their business, either to look at customer leads or to look at supply chain or to manage inventory. And the standard becomes all the more relevant. And a word of caution to many of my friends when we actually do meet in physical sessions, one of the things which I'm asked is we're not that competent in the digital domain or in information systems, so what do we do? I don't think that's a handicap at all. I personally am not an IT expert, but I managed forensics, review of information systems, as well as implementation of systems. I think our accounting background tells us what we need to know. What's the data which is coming in? What's the system supposed to do with it? And what are we supposed to get at the end? I don't think it's very difficult to understand the workings of the system if we understand the three basics. What's the input? What's the expected process? And what do you expect in terms of output? And then define what controls we expect that system to have. Now, we talked about companies with change in IT. That's one aspect of a problem. Second problem with data is, let's take, for example, a borrower who's absconding, or somebody against which bankruptcy proceedings are on, or somebody against which several creditors have filed cases. The borrower is going to be hostile. The team is going to be hostile. It's not going to be as simple and comfortable as doing regular accounting and audit assignments. So we divide this entire exercise into, let me put it as 3 parts. The first part is what I call data acquisition. And that's mentioned very clearly in the standard. How did we get the data? Did we have permission from the data owner? For example, in a company where somebody is absconded, usually you would have something like a resolution professional who, for all practical purposes, runs the company and has taken over the documents from and the systems from the promoters or erstwhile owners. He becomes the data owner. If there's no resolution professional, then the promoters are the owners of the data. So the first step in acquiring it is to get the permission, get it authenticated. So once they give you the data, that isn't enough. We need to apply our own methods to make sure that the data is correct. And how do we do that? There are multiple methods of data validation. There is information available in the public domain. There is confirmations available for some of the data which is available with the lenders in terms of reports submitted earlier. There are claims lodged with respect to that company, which give us a good understanding of what kind of dues they should be having. There would be stock reports and other reports in the past submitted to outsiders, lenders, which would give us some method to validate the data. Third part is data preparation. The objective of this entire exercise is to analyze and discover patterns or anomalies in the data which you have. So data has to be put in a particular format. For example, you could be using a tool like IDEA, ACL, or even writing simple SQL statements or Excel. So even to do something like a VLOOKUP or some kind of comparison in Excel, the data has to be formatted in a particular way. We need to make sure that while formatting, we maintain data integrity. We need to make sure that the data we're looking at is within an acceptable data boundary. We've eliminated outliers. We found explanations for outliers, whether very high or very low. And then we perform what we call data analysis. Identify the top suppliers, identify the top customers, identify top inventory, identify maximum trucks per day, turnaround times. You can look at, for example, speed of loan approvals if you're investigating a bank, volume of transactions at particular times, volumes of transactions at different periods in the year, peaks and low transactions at different times. You can apply analysis techniques and tools to determine whether any of the data is abnormal. Now, when we do all this in terms of analyzing and taking out an anomaly, what we need to make sure is there is what we call a test of reproducibility. Another professional on the same set of data conducting the kind of test you did should come up with the same result. This is the essence of the test of reproducibility. For the standards and the work of forensic professionals to gain acceptance, we can't be having multiple professionals coming with different results with respect to the same set of data and the same set of tests, which is why the entire process of acquiring, validating, and preparing data is of extreme importance. The fourth bullet deals with what we call data privacy laws. In some countries in the world, they are very, very stringent. items even like the address, the phone number, email are extremely sensitive personal information. And the laws extend not just to the period of assignment, but they continue well beyond. In fact, one of the key parts of the Data Protection Act in Europe is the right to be forgotten. In fact, many of the large companies are unable to meet this kind of requirement. So if I decide not to use Google from tomorrow, in Europe, I have the right to demand that Google deletes every trace of information they store about me from all their servers all over the world. So that's the kind of expectation they are coming with. We're not that stringent yet, but we've begun our journey in terms of data privacy. And the other thing, Uday also, I think, touched upon it briefly. The method you acquire the data has to have the consent of the owner of the data. When you conduct the validation, up to that point, the owner should agree that the data is what was there in their place. Second, we need to maintain what is called a chain of custody, so that even when this is taken to court 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, you are able to establish the acquisition and validation steps conducted at the time the evidence was acquired. So this is about data analysis. The next one talks about evidence discovery in the digital domain. So this basically outlines that there has to be an understanding of the information systems environment in which a company operates, where we are primarily going to do our investigation. Because unless we understand how this environment operates, what kind of ERP they use, do they have workflows, do they get data from multiple other systems, how they process that data, how they store the data, and how they retrieve the data. If this has to be clear for us to be able to make the results of what we learned in data analysis transform into evidence which can be in a court of law. Now, the important word in this standard is discovery. Discovery means we find what is already there. And the word has a major significance. When we say discovery, we are finding what is already there, not what is planted. So as part of the discovery, we need to be able to establish that the particular data or data elements we referred to have come into that system in the normal processing of information which they had, whether it is through SAP, whether it is Tally, whether it is Oracle, or any ERP system they may be using, Navision or whatever. So we should be able to be clear that this evidence has come in the normal course of working of that system. The next part is about compliance again and there are restrictions on e-discovery. And the digital domain now is getting all pervasive. And a lot of this is in the gray when we look at legal decisions and case laws and how the high courts and Supreme Courts are dealing with this kind of discovery. How valid is something which you found on Facebook? How valid is something you find on social media? To my view, I personally do not think that on their own they are evidence, but they definitely are flags which can point you to investigate and check their authenticity and uncover or discover more evidence which either proves or disproves what you saw. The social media are indicative, and a lot of people may not always tell the truth on social media, but it's a source of information. But a lot of that is getting debated as to what you post in WhatsApp, what you put in Facebook, what you put in a professional network, what you give as an opinion in an article in a publication which is digital. What are the repercussions? How can they be used? So it's evolving, but to my mind, legally, it's still not tenable as evidence unless it is supported by actual data from somewhere else. And before we move to loans and borrowings, one other point I'd like to clarify. There's a difference between data and analysis. Data, for example, is a backup of somebody's accounting system, backup of somebody's CRM system where the data are in rows and columns, in tables. Analysis is what you do with that data to validate your hypotheses or your assumptions or whatever you're investigating. And analysis can be done if we are looking at establishing a fraud. The person defending the borrower will use the same data to analyze and defend that there is no fraud. So evidence and data should be indisputable. You can pit the analysis against one another if it ends up in a court of law. So primarily, just to go back to the previous slide, the process of data acquisition and validation has to be excellent and foolproof. Then the analysis will stand along with authenticated evidence in a court of law. And then if we use the right tools for data analysis and establish our trails, we would stand a much better chance. One of the reasons that the convictions are low in today's world is primarily because it's difficult. So far, there have been lots of gaps in the way data has been acquired and evidence discovery process has been followed. Loans and borrowings. Now, this I think is, we can go through this very quickly because this is an area most of us are familiar with. The only thing is the standard has not specifically referred to banks. That's the only criteria I will make here, in the sense that the standard has made itself very broad. And it could be any loan, it could be any borrowing. So we're not specifically talking about banks, even though banks form the primary part of loans and borrowings. However, it goes on to clarify that depending on the authority which appoints you, could be, in our case, it's usually a resolution professional or the lead bank of the consortium, but it could be an investigating agency. It could be another creditor. It could be anybody. It could be a private lender. We're looking at going forward. In fact, I've actually done a case where a private equity participant wanted to see what was happening with his money. So the standards are broad, and it has to be tailored to the requirement of the particular appointing authority. Now, one of the key questions which are coming up when forensic reports are submitted is the appointing authorities are not actually comfortable if we're looking only at accounting records. There is an expectation, and we'll discuss the validity of that expectation, but there is an expectation that we should follow procedures for asset tracing. We should identify the flow of transactions in dispute. For example, if the borrower has taken a loan, has the money gone to a related company for a transaction which is not in the normal course of business or which is not at arm's length pricing? If there is such a transaction, then we are expected to follow the money flow. A gave the money to B. Now, did that money come back to A? Did it go through a cycle of fictitious transactions before it came back? That is an expectation the institutions are having. And my personal view again, it's a difficult expectation to meet. From what I have done so far. Difficult for three reasons. One is there's data privacy. I do not have official access to the bank accounts of B when I'm investigating A. So very difficult for me to establish the money trail. If B is a company where A is related in terms of being a holding company, in terms of holding substantial interest, in terms of having common directors, the best I can do is demonstrate an effort to trace the asset, which means write to the common director, ask them for access, and say that it was denied. Second thing, if a consortium banker has the accounting transactions of B, it is legitimate for me to ask them to share those transactions with me. If they give it, my job is solved. If they don't give it and I record it, so these are difficult areas, but we'll have to find ways to get around them. The question I'm asked very often, if we don't get it, then how will we get the right? We don't get the right because we're not the police, we're not the CBI, we're not the EOW, and we cannot get information which otherwise, to put it simply, needs a warrant. But yes, there is information available in the public domain. There are GST records, there are income tax records, there are MCA records, there are the same MCA records submitted by suppliers and creditors. So we can do reasonable efforts to collect information from other sources to corroborate beyond what the SSE is giving us. And a lot of times in purchase, you have data from commodity exchanges. If they are imports, there are multiple sources to obtain current prices. So there are ways we can validate whether the accounting records are right and go way beyond what a normal audit or accounting professional would do. That is the expectation from the standard. So they talk about the kind of disputes which mostly we are familiar with. The largest kind of transaction which come is actually D, where misutilization of funds or funds not utilized happens. The B is usually is simpler to ascertain. E is usually done by the bankers themselves. So these are what they ask us to do, which we are familiar with. But like say the end, it's a balance. And how to write what we find, we will come to in the standard on reporting. Reporting is perhaps, like Uday said, an aspect of the work in which we don't spend enough time. At the end of the day, what remains is the report. All the hard work, all the analysis, all the tools, working 15 hours a day, 16 hours a day, hostile environments, getting threatened by people when you visit factories, all that doesn't stay. What remains in the public domain is what we write. Which is why I completely agree with Uday that the maximum amount of time, as much as you can, you should spend on the report. Now, standards are pretty clear. It says precise and unambiguous. You address them to your primary stakeholder. There is no fixed form in a report because the kinds of work which come, there could be a partner asking us to do an investigation on whether his partner is cheating him or not in a partnership firm. Like I said, you could have a private equity or an angel investor wanting to know what's happening with his money. There could be a bank wanting to know what happened to their money. So there are multiple kinds of things, or there could be an investigation into insider trading. There could be something to do with manipulation of stock markets. There could be purchase-related frauds. There could be inventory frauds. So there are multiple kinds of frauds. There can be financial institution-related frauds. So there's no fixed standard, but we can definitely say that you should cover certain basic things. What's the background of the appointment? What's the scope of work? What limitations did you have? What assumptions you had? What tools which you used? Any limitations with those tools? What's the executive summary of your finding? Executive summary is usually the most important part of the report because most of the top management don't go beyond that. And so that has to cover everything of importance. And then there could be individual observations. And the executive summary should include a summary conclusion as well. So it doesn't matter what it is, these basic elements have to be a part of the report. Now, this is something which we observe in several cases. Number 6 is not followed. The report cannot express an opinion or pass judgment on guilt or innocence. And many people are tempted to do this in the report. And they're usually thrown out for this reason whenever it comes to a court of law. Second, so let me put it simply. Let's say someone is doing an investigation and I'm guilty of a purchase fraud. You have established my guilt. You have established that money has come to my account. You have confessional statements from vendors that the bills were inflated and a percentage of the inflated bills came to me. You have statements from vendors stating that in some cases products were not delivered, payments were still made, and a percentage came to me. You have established in my bank account that these credits have come. So let's pick up three things. One is the vendor has told you that he gave me money in return for allowing him to give a purchase order at an inflated value. He has also been paid for a transaction where he didn't supply anything. He has told you the dates on which he has made payment to me. Those dates you have managed to correlate with a bank statement, which you obtained legally. Even in such a case, you will not talk about guilt. You will write the report objectively to say, number one, against these GRNs, no goods were received in the factory. They were signed by Sailesh. The price of this item is so much was paid for it. The excessive price was approved by Sailesh. We have a statement from the vendor confirming this is the background, this is the amount of overbilling, and this percentage as per the vendor went to Sailesh's account. We have examined Sailesh's bank account and find credits from the vendor and the vendor bank statement correspondingly, showing the debit that these payments were paid on this date. Given the above evidence, we conclude that it is highly likely that these transactions are fraudulent and they should be subjected to further investigation. Now, the reason we do that is we're not the judge. We're not the police. The investigator is not here to say that I am guilty or not. That is for the court of law to decide. He has put enough facts on the table where the reader can make the conclusion or opinion of my guilt. But the guilt proving would remain in a court of law. And the other thing is, many times you can't complete the investigation for different reasons. Maybe you were threatened. Maybe you didn't get enough data. Maybe the cooperation or hostility was so much that it was felt we couldn't proceed. Maybe differences of opinion arose. Maybe there was a pandemic. Maybe there was illness. Maybe there was any force majeure. As closure, a status report should come, giving an assessment of what's done, providing the reasons for the incomplete nature, and submitted as a matter of closure. So the elements are summarized here. And I think you would have covered working with an expert in one of the earlier ones, but if there are questions, I can help. And while we recommend a conclusion section, the conclusion should always be included in the executive summary as well. So it should lie here as well as here. The only thing I'd highlight before closing on the use of an expert is no matter how big the expert, the responsibility for the conclusions remains with the investigator. The expert's responsibility is to the investigator depending on their contract. So don't outsource everything to an expert. Make sure that control is available with whoever is signing the forensic report. Okay, Vaibhavji, I think that's what I wanted to cover.
Sir.
And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
I'll just check for the questions. No, sir, there are no questions.
Yeah, Friday night, I doubt there'll be questions. Yes, sir.
So, thank you, sir. Thank you, Shaitesh. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for having a session on a Friday night. We should thank you actually.
No, Friday night, I don't have problem, but I'm sure Goa has a problem.
अभी तो टैक्स फाइलिंग चल रहा है, सो ज्यादा कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है.
हाँ, वो भी है. क्या कहते हो, बढ़ेगा कि नहीं?
सर
डेट बढ़ाएंगे कि नहीं? पिछली बार मार्च तक दिया था.
पता नहीं सर, अभी तो मैडम नहीं बोल रही है, देखते हैं क्या होता है. सभी मैडम के हाथ में है.
We are all discussing tax only. It is the subject of the season. Yes, no problem. Vaibhavji, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for having this session and explaining the concept very clearly. I think that concludes our session for today. Thank all the eminent speakers, starting with our Uday sir, first Harish Dua sir, Uday sir, Shailesh sir. I also thank our chairman of the board, Charanjit Singh Nanda sir, vice chairman, the vice chairman sir, all of them for giving opportunity to Goa branch to host this event, and also thank our support team who are there with us from an entire session. Thank you very much, Ayaz. And that concludes our
And
session.
one thanks to Uday for agreeing to be my standby, because I wasn't sure of my internet. So I requested Udayji to please be there in case something went wrong. So thank you so much, Uday.
Yes, I'm there still with you, sir.
I know, I can see you.
Always with you.
Actually, I request Uday sir to put on a video. I have not seen him yet.
Uday doesn't show his face very easily, but there he is.
Actually, Uday sir had promised that he will show his face at the end of the session. Sir, you are on mute, sir. Uday sir, you are on mute.
Yeah, actually, I was running out of time. That's why I thought not to share at that point of time.
Yes, sir. That's why I reminded you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Vaibhavji. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much, everybody.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bye.